Welcome to another episode of Creative Cooking. Today we're going to make a Sicilian pizza. It's essentially a focaccia seasoned with a very intense sauce using breadcrumbs and grated cheese as the topping. So let's get going. We'll start by proofing 1 tablespoon of dry yeast in some of the warm water that we prepared, along with a tablespoon of sugar. Give it a good mix and let it proof for about 5 minutes. Now that the yeast has been proofed, we'll go ahead and add 2 tablespoons of extra virgin olive oil, a tablespoon of salt, the remaining warm water, and 4 cups of all-purpose flour. Install the dough hook and set the machine to a low setting and let the machine run for about 5 to 6 minutes. After 5 minutes, it'll look something like this. A very sticky dough. Maybe just a little too much. So I'm going to go ahead and spoon in a couple spoons of flour just to dry it up. Just a little. It's falling off that dough hook too fast. And then we'll turn the machine on for another couple of minutes and see what happens. After another 2 minutes, this is what it looks like. You can see that it's falling off the dough hook, but not as fast as before. And this is how we want it. Scrape down the sides of the bowl, then add some olive oil around the edges of the bowl and also on top of the dough, and then using your hand just run it underneath and around the bowl and over the top. This will keep the dough from sticking to the bowl. It'll also keep the dough from drying out. Cover the bowl with plastic wrap and then with a towel. Set aside in a warm place to rise for 1.5 hours. Now for the sauce. This is no ordinary sauce. It's very thick and rich with onions, garlic, and spices, and anchovies. But don't worry, you won't see them and you'll barely taste them. Anchovies are high in glutamates, which is why they call them anchovies, Italian MSG. The resulting sauce is very rich and holds moisture because of the onions. So go ahead and saute 2 large onions in some olive oil and cook those until they just become translucent. Add some garlic and stir for another 2 minutes. Add 1.5 cups of tomato sauce and give it a stir. Follow it up with a tablespoon of sugar, a 1/2 teaspoon of red pepper, 1 teaspoon of black pepper, and 1 teaspoon of oregano. Next, add 1 tablespoon of tomato paste. I like to use it in the tube. It saves money. You don't need to open a whole can. Finally, add 1 can of anchovies that have been drained. And don't worry, they'll melt right into the sauce. You won't even know they're there. So you don't have to tell anybody it's there. Isn't that wonderful? Give it a good stir. Cover and simmer until the onions are cooked. This won't take very long, maybe 5 minutes. Taste for seasoning, and if it needs it, add some salt. Mine did. When the onions are done, give it a final mix and remove it from the heat to cool and get on to the next step. And that would be to make the breadcrumb topping. So what I have here is a block of Parmigiano Reggiano that I'll be grating, and I'm measuring out about 1/2 ounce. It's very strong, and when mixed with the other Italian cheeses, it's going to add a robust flavor to that crumb topping. Then blend that with 6 ounces of an Italian cheese blend that includes pecorino romano, some mozzarella, and sharp provolone. Add 3/4 of a cup of fine, plain dry breadcrumbs, not the panko, to a food processor. To that you'll add 1 cup of finely grated pecorino cheese, 1 tablespoon of the anchovy oil, or 1 tablespoon of olive oil, and then 2 tablespoons of olive oil, for a total of 3. Pulse that until everything is combined, the oil, the breadcrumbs, and the cheese, and set aside. Line a half baking sheet with a generous amount of olive oil and spread it all the way around and up the edges. I want to make sure that pan has plenty of oil. Turn out the dough onto the pan, and then using your hands, stretch the dough out to the edges. The dough is very elastic, so be patient. It's going to want to try to pull back to the center. Just let it rest for a couple of minutes and try again. You may have to repeat that stretch and rest routine a couple of times, but eventually the dough will cooperate. When that's done, spread 6 ounces of finely shredded cheese. It's a combination of mozzarella and some sharp provolone. You can also use more of the pecorino. And if worst comes to worst, you just get a package of 4 cheese Italian or 5 cheese Italian. Measure out about 6 ounces and spread it out very evenly over the top of the pizza. You might say, well, why are you putting the cheese on the dough? Well, it's a couple of reasons really, because the star of the show is the breadcrumb topping. The cheese is going on here to give some flavor, but also to insulate the dough from the sauce so all the liquid doesn't get absorbed by the dough. We actually want to keep that sauce very thick. So go ahead and spread this out. And be careful not to put any pressure down on the dough. We don't want to deflate it. Any little large, super large bubbles, go ahead and pop those if you like, but let the dough, touch it as little as possible. The same goes for the sauce. What you want to do here is take spoonsful and use little dollops here and there. And then once you have the dollops in the general area where they're going to go, use the back of the spoon, or better still, use your fingers to spread it out as evenly as possible as you can, right to the edges of the pizza. And in the final step, we'll take that breadcrumb mixture that we had in the food processor, and we'll just sprinkle that around the pizza. Same concept, try to cover the entire thing as evenly as possible, and try not to touch the pizza any more than you have to. Now, breaking with tradition, I decided to go ahead and throw some pepperoni on top of this. It's not traditional, it's not authentic, and it's not something you have to do. My wife likes pepperoni on pizza, and so do I. So I went ahead and put some on there, but I did it very sparingly. They're thin slices. But you know what? That sauce and breadcrumb topping has so much flavor in it, you really don't need the pepperoni. Trust me. Pop that in the center of a 400-degree oven and bake for 30 to 35 minutes. Long enough for the dough to cook without burning the breadcrumbs. It's okay if a few crumbs get toasted, but stop there. And if you like time-lapse, there you go. After 35 minutes, take it out of the oven and check the bottom just to make sure that the dough is cooked. You can actually feel it's a little crunchy on the bottom. So the next thing you want to do is turn that out onto a cooling rack and allow that pizza to come down to room temperature. And if you're as hungry as I was when I was making this, slide that puppy right off that cooling rack and hit it either with a pizza cutter or your chef's knife. And that's how I like to cut it, with a chef's knife. And try to cut it in nice, even squares, but you can make them large, small. It's entirely up to you. And there you have it, an almost authentic Sicilian pizza. Great for any party, potluck, picnic, or any event. So don't forget to join us each week for more great videos made for people who like to cook. Bon appetit.